Hi guys, welcome back to AP Environmental Science. We are starting our brand new unit, which is all about basically aquatic ecosystems and how we use them and also how we impact them. So this unit is super short and most of these videos will actually be super short as well. So as always, follow along in your note packet and let's get started. So our very first topic in this unit is watersheds. Okay, so what is a watershed? It's all of the land that drains into a specific body of water, such as a river, lake, a bay, etc. It's determined by the slope and the ridges of lands that divide like a watershed. So, for example, depending on the topography, which is essentially the elevation and the geological formations of land in an area, you're going to have different kinds and sizes of watersheds, okay? Determined by the slope and the ridges of land, okay? So, for example, here, this whole area is a watershed, and all of these arrows show the flow of water depending on essentially the slope and the ridges, okay? So, vegetation, soil composition, slope all play a large role in how watersheds drain water. So, more vegetation, more infiltration, and groundwater recharge. Remember, infiltration is how water gets into the soil and recharges groundwater. So, we can see that right here. So, water is trickling down through the soil and it enters an underground source called groundwater. Okay? When you have more vegetation, water can seep through the soil. When we have a greater slope, an increased slope, we have faster velocity of the runoff and more soil erosion. So the steeper the slope, we're going to have a faster movement of water down that slope, which is going to increase our soil erosion. And soil permeability determines how much water is run off versus how much water infiltrates through the soil. And remember, different types of soil have different water holding capacities. So don't forget about sand, silt, and clay and how much each one of those type of soils holds onto water. So human activities of a watershed impact water quality. Agriculture, clear cutting, urbanization, dams, mining. Okay. We're going to get more into like how dams impact this in our next unit, but we have talked about agricultural impacts, clear cutting, the permanent removal of trees, urbanization was in our last unit, and mining was in our last unit. So the Chesapeake Bay watershed is a very important watershed that spans pretty much not the entire East Coast, but a pretty big portion of the East Coast. So it's a 6-state region that drains into a series of streams and rivers and eventually into the Chesapeake Bay, which is right here in between like Maryland and Delaware. Okay. So it's a mix of fresh and salt water. The nutrients and sediment make estuary habitats like salt marshes in the bay highly productive. Remember, estuary salt marshes, they are highly productive areas, high rates of photosynthesis. And they look like this. They're very beautiful. We have salt marshes in New Jersey. So estuaries and wetlands provide ecosystem services, tourism revenue, hotel, restaurants, permits to go fishing, water infiltration, the grass roots trap pollutants. It's a habitat for food sources, also medicine. Fish and crabs can be harvested there. Storm protection, it absorbs and buffers floods. Okay. And these are some examples of some things that we can do there. Remember, ecosystem services are anything that the environment provides to us. So these are some examples. Now, because we are using estuaries and wetlands, there are going to be human impacts on them. So when we have a lot of nutrient pollution, such as nitrogen and phosphorus, it's going to lead to eutrophication in the bay. We should know by now what eutrophication is. It's when you have an algal bloom due to increased nitrogen and phosphorus. They are limiting nutrients, especially phosphorus. So when you have them in excess, you're going to have an increased growth of algae. They sit on the top layer of the lake or the river, wherever it is, most usually a lake. And we're going to have decreased sunlight. Plants below the surface die because they cannot photosynthesize. Bacteria use up oxygen for decomposition. And then now we have hypoxia, low oxygen, and dead zones, leading to a ton of fish dying off. So major sources of nitrogen and phosphorus into watersheds, the Chesapeake Bay, and just water in general. Discharge from sewage treatment plants, they're going to really be releasing a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus from human waste, animal waste from CAFOs, synthetic fertilizer from agricultural fields and lawns. So water treatment plants empty out into the water. And we can see other things here like the farm and livestock runoff. So other major pollutants also include endocrine disruptors from sewage treatment. We're going to get into endocrine disruptors in Unit 9. So we're almost there. We have a few more units to go before we get here. Sediment pollution, deforestation, urbanization, and tilling is all going to pollute the sediment, which is going to run off into local waterways and increase the turbidity. Again, turbidity is the cloudiness or the clarity of the water, okay? And it covers over rocky streamed habitats. Here's some fish. Okay, so effects of clear cutting on watersheds. Soil erosion caused by loss of stabilizing root structures, removes soil organic matter and nutrients from the forest, and it deposits sediments in local streams because of the runoff. Warms water and makes it more turbid, cloudy. Okay, so here we can see that back here we have a lot of trees. Here we have cut them all down. We have clear cutting, and this slope is pretty steep. So when it rains, all of this water is going to be running off into the local waterway. And remember, the steeper the slope, the greater the velocity, the faster the velocity of the water running off, causing soil erosion to happen more intensely. This water is going to carry the sediments into the waterways, and it's going to increase the turbidity, making it more cloudy. Another impact is going to be increased soil and stream temperature. The loss of tree shade increases the soil temperature. So, this is a little common sense thing here, guys. When it's hot outside, you stand in the shade and it's less hot. Why? Because the shade is not getting direct sunlight because it's being blocked by something else. In a forest, trees or canopy cover block out a lot of the sunlight from hitting the soil. Sunlight makes things warm. Okay, a photon is a particle of light. It carries heat, it carries energy, and when it hits the surface, it warms it. So when you have trees covering an area, underneath it's a lot cooler because the trees are absorbing the light and preventing it from hitting the ground. But when we clear cut these areas, the ground will be significantly hotter than the areas that have canopy cover. Okay? So the loss of tree shade increases soil temperature. Soil has a lower albedo than the leaves of trees. Loss of tree shade along rivers and streams warms them. Erosion of sediments into rivers also warms them as well. And we should then go back to our Unit 4 on ecological tolerance and biodiversity. All living things have an ecological tolerance where they can only withstand a certain range of conditions, including temperature. So if we have critters that live in the soil and the soil is too hot for them, they will not survive. If the sediment is now getting warmer and running off into local waterways and it warms the river, aquatic organisms have an ecological tolerance. They might not be able to withstand a higher temperature of water, even if it's by 1 degree. They will not survive and they will die. Okay. So a lot of these are solutions to watershed pollutants. Okay, this is from our Unit 5 FRQ, a riparian. A riparian is just the land that exists next to a waterway. So a riparian buffer, a buffer is anything that kind of negates or mitigates the effects of something. So riparian buffers in this case would be planted areas with vegetation to reduce runoff, to give crop cover, canopy cover, to reduce the effects I just described here. Okay. More vegetation, more root systems decreases soil erosion. When you have canopy cover of trees, of grasses, whatever, it makes the soil less hot, meaning that the sediment that is running off, if there is any, it's not going to be hot and it won't be warming up the waterways. Okay. Enhanced nutrient removal. This is expensive. This is when our water treatment plants are going to be making sure that we are not putting in as much nitrogen and phosphorus into the local waterways, thus decreasing rates of eutrophication. This is more expensive than just planting some crops. Okay. Same thing over here. Septic tank upgrades, making sure that we are removing as much nitrogen and phosphorus as we can. Um, and down here, the nutrient percolation purification. Percolation is kind of like the same thing as infiltration. It's we have a lot of similar terms here, but essentially it's when we want to make sure that we have enough soil space in between the ground and the groundwater to make sure that nutrients can kind of diffuse out into the soil without going directly into our groundwater in higher quantities. And this stuff, animal manure management, making sure that the waste that's produced by animals is not high in nutrients. That way, when it's washed off into waterways, it's not causing eutrophication. And that is it for this topic. If you guys have any questions, let me know. I will be here to help. I will see you all in class.